Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2241. The topic is nutrition, and the title is Pre-Workout Carb Loading. I had a fellow trainer and former client reach out to me on Facebook Messenger. We'd worked together for bench press performance. They do bench press competitions, and then also they were struggling with a shoulder issue before, so I helped them with that. And then they train people themselves. So it's been pretty fun to have interactions over the years and get to drop in every now and then with some information. They recently asked a question on Facebook Messenger in regards to carb loading pre-workout. This was a fun question that I definitely thought would make a relatable podcast. So I'll read through what they wrote, my answer to them, and then how I would extrapolate that answer to you, the listener. They wrote the following: I have a question about performance-based nutrition, and I'd love your input. About an hour and a half out from my training session, so about 90 minutes, I consume nearly a cup and a half of rice that is pretty heavily salted and 2 bottles of water. I add this because I've always heard, I'm not sure what that word is. I think he's saying I've added the salt. I add the salt because I've always heard you're not properly hydrating without sodium. So what he's referring to there is consuming water alone doesn't ensure that you're hydrated in the sense of performance. If somebody is underfed, meaning they haven't been eating enough calories, and that would include, say, carbohydrates like fuel, just diluting what you currently don't have enough of with more and more water does not lead to optimal performance, because you won't have enough sodium, potassium, chloride, like all the things that are involved with muscular contraction. And you can summarize that under an umbrella term of electrolytes. So if you've ever heard of like sports drinks saying with electrolytes, what they're referring to is that water alone is not optimal hydration. You want to have water plus electrolytes, and then you definitely should be having proper calories, which would include carbohydrates, in order to perform optimally. And this would be for like explosive-based sports, like athletes, and like field athletes. Let's say that, like football, basketball, baseball, soccer, things like that, where there's like sprinting involved, jumping involved, and then weight training. Those type of activities are going to be fueled best through carbohydrates, and that would then need to include hydration, including electrolytes, in order to then be properly quote-unquote hydrated. So there's a lot more to hydration than simply just drinking water. So that was a good point that they know that. And then they added, about 20 minutes out from my training session, I take 2 caffeine pills, which total 400 milligrams of caffeine. During my workout, I'm usually sipping on some kind of extra or some kind of intra-workout, such as Pedialyte, Gatorade, or even actually Mountain Dew. All of those choices contain water, sodium, and simple carbs, but the Mountain Dew adds a little more caffeine to the mix. My question is, am I overdoing it? My thinking is that I'm topping off my glycogen stores. So we'll pause there for a second. Glycogen is stored carbohydrates, sodium, and water in your muscles. So when you eat carbohydrates and then you're drinking fluid, and then the sodium that is within your food, all those 3 elements, carbohydrates, sodium, and water, get packaged together and put into your muscle tissue, like your muscle cells, as energy. So it's like putting gasoline in your gas tank. The muscles now have this energy that it can use, the glucose, which is from your carbohydrates, the sodium and the water. It can now use that to perform muscular contractions. So glycogen is a fancy word for stored carbohydrates, sodium, and water in your muscles, energy in the muscles. So he was saying that he's topping off his glycogen stores as they're being depleted. If my workouts aren't based around performance, then why am I even lifting? That was rhetorical. But I would really like to know if this is just too much. I also had an epiphany as to why I'm always sweating more than the other guys. And I think it's because I'm coming in super saturated, if you will, and then consuming the caffeine, which is a diuretic. Anyway, I would just really like to know if I'm overdoing it with my pre-workout meal. And then he added a photo of his post-workout meal, and he said, I'm sure you'll find my post-workout excessively gross. 6 raw eggs, 2 cups of egg whites, and 1 cup of milk, all mixed together. That's roughly 100 grams of protein that I can make and consume in less than 5 minutes. So I didn't really answer him on that one, but to each their own. I'm sure I have, weird food habits. So for example, my breakfast for a while was tuna and rice because I don't care about what time of the day I'm eating things. But for others, I'm sure tuna and rice sounds disgusting as a breakfast. So we all have our own quirks. Who am I to judge? My response was, thank you for asking. I will make an extended answer podcast this week. And here we go. So the short answer, refilling glycogen has a specific rate at which it can happen. And from a quick read through of what you wrote, you're likely doing the following. So real quick before I get into it. He does a carnivore diet. So outside of his workout, pre-workout meal and post-workout meal, I don't believe he consumes direct carbohydrates. Why that's important is he's going to be coming into his pre-workout meal completely emptied of glycogen. Because after his post-workout meal, his body's going to burn through that glycogen just trying to process the protein and do general activities. And then he's active the rest of the evening. He's then active all the next day because he works out in the afternoon. He's active all the next day. So by the time he gets to his pre-workout meal, his glycogen stores are at 0. With that in mind, what I was going to now tell him is what he might be struggling with and what might be happening is he's oversaturating the carbs and fluid intake given the time from the workout. Meaning that he's only giving his body 90 minutes to completely fill his glycogen storage, which is not going to happen. That is not enough time, not anywhere near enough time. It is definitely enough for some of the carbohydrates to be in it, like when they're in excess, meaning he's going to burn off some of the carbohydrates just simply by the act of eating, and then by the next 90 minutes, getting in his car and driving to the gym, then going to the gym, tying his shoes, putting on clothes, he's already starting to chip away at the carbohydrates that he's eating. So there's a base amount of carbohydrates that he's eating in his pre-workout that won't even be there by the time he works out. The remaining amount that would be in excess, he's only giving his body 90 minutes to form glycogen. And he will not top off his stores, his storage capacity. There's going to be differing amount of glycogen capacity depending, like each individual, depending on muscle tissue, and then performance history. What this refers to is the more muscle you have, the more glycogen you can store. And then the more extreme conditions that you train at, the more demanding conditions you place on the body for glycogen, the body will increase its ability and utilization to form and utilize glycogen. Now that would be a smaller amount of variance as opposed to muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is going to be a huge amount of variance. If you have a person who's 130 pounds versus somebody who's 260, their 260-pound person with muscle tissue is going to store way more glycogen. It can be upwards up over 300 grams in related to the grams of carbohydrates that you would eat. For example, there are many bodybuilders who would consider a low-carb day to be 150 grams of carbs a day. And for others, they might hear that and think, holy crap, if I ate 150 grams of carbs, I would get fat. It's not true, but that's what they're going to think. But for many people who are athletes, they'll eat upwards of 300, 400, 500 grams of carbs a day, even actually more. And it depends on the type of athlete they are. Like I work with CrossFit Games athletes, Olympic athletes, professional athletes, and they would eat in excess over 500 grams of carbs a day, and they have six-pack abs and veins everywhere. So the amount of carbs a person can consume, convert to glycogen, and then utilize in their training is very, very, very high. What he's trying to do is to go from 0 to full in one meal. He's not consuming enough, and he's not giving his body enough time anyhow. So if we're looking at trying to optimize glycogen storage, which then optimizes our muscle performance, assuming that we do the maximal amount of performance our body's capable of, that would take many meals, many hours. And what all that meant was, if I go into the gym, I do a couple little banded drills to warm up my shoulders. I do in total 12 sets of bench press, 3 sets of some dumbbell presses, 3 sets of some back rows, and then I leave the gym. I did not do anything that required the maximum amount of glycogen that my body can store. As opposed to somebody who goes in and does, say, an hour and a half of CrossFit, where they're doing the Metcons and then the strength sections and doing all this other crazy stuff. They're going to be much more demanding on glycogen stores than a quote-unquote powerlifter type workout would be. With that said, he doesn't actually need to fill up his glycogen stores. Given the type of training that he does, he wouldn't fully demand that from his body. He does demand some, and that's what he's doing, but he wouldn't need to pursue absolute full peak glycogen replenishment pre-workout, because he's not going to completely deplete that during his workout. How much activity based on how much glycogen support you need, that's all individual basis, and that's all experimental. You would have to work with the athlete to find out what that is. There are some good general guidelines and guesses as a coach, but it's a lot of experimentation. So for each person I work with, we would experiment with that over the course of multiple workouts, multiple weeks, if not multiple months, to try to find the right balance of hydration, carb fueling, and other elements that are related to performance, such as other supplementation. But this is something that I would suggest to him, and what I gave him in the answer was he's putting a lot into his system and demanding it to do a lot in 90 minutes. So I'll get into some recommendations after I move on to the next section. The other component is he's possibly mistiming the protein digestion post-workout, giving the body too much short-term protein without including a slower or more moderate protein and or other elements such as carbohydrates or fat. You wouldn't want to do fats post-workout, and I'll get into that in a second. But he's not modulating the digestion rate of the protein. He's essentially giving his body protein that digests within 20 minutes and 100 freaking grams of it right now. His body doesn't need 100 grams in 20 minutes. That's too much, too quick. He would need to spread that out in order to better utilize that 100 grams. Some changes that I suggested was the 90-minute pre-workout. He can keep that meal the same, like have the cup and a half of the rice with the 2 bottles of water. He doesn't need to salt it to the point where it's like disgusting. So he can just do some light salt. And the caffeine is personal choice. 400 milligrams is quite high. But if he's used to that, then go for it. If you don't have any blood pressure issues, if you don't have any anxiety issues, that's fine. That's something for him to play around with. But that isn't a red flag right away. Intra-workout, he's doing Pedialyte, Gatorade, or the Mountain Dew. Pedialyte's very expensive. It's also very saturated with sodium and electrolytes. It's almost kind of too much. There's almost not enough water to Pedialyte. Pedialyte is really good when you're dehydrated, but it's not something that you sip on in a hydrated state, if that makes sense. Mountain Dew, is that optimal? I would argue, you can argue yes or no. The elements are fine. It's simple sugars, and that would be okay. But again, is that how many sugars is he getting for the fluid amount, it's likely a typical Mountain Dew, a typical soda, I believe, is like 60 some grams of sugar for like a little can of it. It's quite a large amount. He doesn't actually need that much. So I would recommend the Gatorade. And typical Gatorade, he probably, you could even argue whether he really needs it, but the Gatorade out of the three choices is the best choice. And maybe 16 to 24 ounces would be enough. Usually during a workout, you're looking at 20 to 30 grams of sugar is probably plenty of fine. And you want to spread that out over a lot of fluid. Then post-workout, 60 grams of protein would be fine. He doesn't need 100 grams from the sources he listed. So I would cut that down. I would do 40, maybe 60 grams. And then about 60 to 90 minutes later, I would do another protein food source, whole food source. So give yourself the fast proteins after the workout, but 40 to 60 grams is plenty. Don't need 100. And then after about an hour to an hour and a half, 60, 90 minutes, he would then have another whole food meal to give his body more protein to be processing and putting towards muscle synthesis, like muscle creation. So what he's doing isn't wrong. It's not even bad. And that's what I wrote to him. It's just likely maybe not fully optimized. And that would take some time to play around with. But that would be my general consensus, is that the pre-workout, you can keep that. Don't need to douse it in salt. But just lightly salting it, probably fine. Intra-workout, Gatorade is going to be a better balance of sugars and hydration to total fluid intake compared to Pedialyte or Mountain Dew. And then post-workout, 40 to 60 grams of faster protein is enough. And then about an hour later, have whole food protein sources. And that would be a better blend. It would also be a lot cheaper. So that'll help him save money as well. Now, he wrote, so one thing I've learned from your podcast is that fat will slow down the digestion rate. So with that in mind, should I leave out the whole milk and whole eggs from my post-workout shake and replace it with egg whites and skim milk, just protein and carbs to shuttle the protein in faster? So what I wrote back was the fats post-workout aren't ideal, so you're correct there. I had actually assumed the milk was skim milk, so that was a fault on my part. But I didn't think he was drinking whole milk. So if he was drinking whole milk, then he's right. He should drop the fats. Fats post-workout are so blunting to the digestion of the protein that you're almost doing the opposite of what the problem was. So I assumed the problem was that he was having all this fast digesting protein and it was just being shuttled in with a little bit of skim milk. It's almost too much protein too quickly. Whereas if it was whole milk, it's now a lot of protein, but the fats in the whole milk would have really blunted the digestion rate, and it would have slowed things down so much that he actually wasn't then optimizing how much protein he was getting in right away. So the change of that little addition of skim milk versus whole milk can almost flip-flop the issue with that meal. It goes from too fast to too slow. So in general, are egg whites and skim milk going to be best post-workout? I don't know anyone that would recommend that. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's just egg whites are not. If you're looking at what's common and going to be arguable as the most bioavailable, you're going to look at whey isolate protein powder, and then shuttling in that with some simple carbohydrates, whether that's sugars. Or you could do very fast digesting, like say low-fat muffins or breads, things like that. When I was doing my master's in nutrition, my thesis was on post-workout nutrient timing and types. So I did it was a 50-page paper, 200 peer-reviewed research articles to support the content, and then you had to make an argumentative case over what would be optimal. And I studied that and did that for a whole semester, and that was the only thing I focused on in the entire thesis was post-workout macronutrient consumption and timing. Essentially, what's going to be best is whey isolate protein powder and some sugars or fast carbs. Have that within 20 minutes after the workout. Then about an hour later, have some whole food. That's as simple as it gets, but that's actually as simple as it needs to be. That's a really good answer to what would be best post-workout. Now, what I want to go to is the general tips that would be takeaways for you, the listener. If we're looking at pre-workout carb loading, there are 3 things we want to focus on: is hydration, fueling, and electrolytes. Hydration is, even they've done a bunch of studies, and even like a 2% dehydration status decreases optimal performance. All that really means is our body is very sensitive to being dehydrated. The reason why is water is involved in damn near every process of our body, including muscular contractions. If we don't have enough water available, things are not going to run optimally. So we want to be hydrated at the time of our workout. In general, a basic way to know if you're hydrated is if you pee before your workout, which you're probably going to do at some point in time of the day. Even if you work out in the morning, you're going to wake up, pee, and then go work out, right? Your pee should be clear. If your pee is yellowed, you're definitely dehydrated. If there's any smell to it, you're really dehydrated. So the pee should be clear. If your pee is clear, you're quote unquote one sign of being okay, in an okay hydration state. We want to combine fluid when possible with whole food, because whole foods are going to contain and whole food, carbohydrate-based whole food. That would be a good way for me to make sure I drop that note in. So we want to combine fluid intake with carbohydrate whole foods. That's going to likely include some amount of micronutrients, which will be electrolyte-based, including like sodium, for example. Is if we combine fluid and whole food carbohydrates, that is going to create that glycogen that we want, which is going to be carbohydrates broken down in our body is called glucose. So when you eat a carbohydrate molecule, our body strips it apart and creates glucose. It's going to combine glucose with sodium and water and put that in our muscles as glycogen. That is direct hydration to the muscle. So the water is being stored in the muscle. That's as hydrated gets. So if we combine fluid and whole food carbohydrates that are likely going to combine some kind of sodium in it, we're going to form glycogen that's going to optimize hydration. That would be a recommendation: is pre-workout, drink fluid and have whole food carbohydrates. How much fluid? This is variable. I'm going to give an answer, but some people are going to say, oh my God, that's not enough. And some people are going to go, oh my God, that's too much. So a baseline of like a 24-hour period of time, fluid intake would be half our body weight in ounces of fluid. So if I weigh 150 pounds, I should drink 75 ounces of fluid. If I weigh 200 pounds, I should drink 100 ounces of fluid. Some people just freaked out because they said that is not enough. Other people said that is too much. I understand. For the people who say it's not enough, you're correct. That is the absolute minimum recommendation. That is the baseline bottom of the recommendation. The recommendation range I typically give is 0.5 ounces to 1 ounce per pound of body weight, and that's regular human beings. Athletes should drink above that. If you are not even getting remotely close to that, don't demand yourself to automatically double or triple your fluid intake. It's not going to happen. Just slowly increase it over time. Try to drink a little bit more fluid throughout the day. Try to carry a fluid bottle around with you throughout the day. Just focus on trying to get more in. You want to get to a minimum of half your body weight in ounces of fluid, and then continue to work your way up to your body weight in ounces of fluid. That can be challenging. I totally understand. But it's going to be in a per 24-hour state, a closer amount to what you would need, to which would then better optimize your hydration chances of being hydrated at the time of your workout. Okay? Next, we want to think of fuel. So again, the 3 things we focus on are hydration, fuel, and electrolytes. So the second is fuel is carbohydrates. If we want to think about our total, like how many carbohydrates should I have, we need to figure out our total calories. So you can go to a bmrcalculator.net, just type that into Google. You would type in your age, weight, height, and then there's different other factors, but those basic things will get you started. It's going to again it's going to spit out a little chart at you, and it's going to say, okay, here's your BMR, which is your basal metabolic rate. That's the minimum amount of calories your body needs to operate itself on a daily basis. Then it says if you have a sedentary lifestyle, here's the amount of calories that'll probably maintain your weight. If you have a semi-active, here's the calories. Super active, here's the calories. It'll give you a range. Is that 100% accurate? Hell no. But it's based on a lot of really well thought out formulas. When I used to teach at the university level and I taught exercise physiology labs, we did a breath test that would calculate your BMR. Even if you do that kind of testing, or you do a DEXA scan that calculates your BMR, it's all just meant to get you in the ballpark, and then you have to kind of figure it out from there. So that calculation, bmrcalculator.net, then use the chart to match your activity level, is going to give you in the ballpark. Of that total calories, 0.8 to 1.2 grams of, this is what you're going to do for protein, by the way. should enter that first. So of the total calories, we have to allocate a certain amount to protein. How much should be 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight? You can argue with me if it's higher or lower, whatever, that's going to get you in the ballpark. So if I weigh 150 pounds, I should eat 150 grams, roughly. You can do the math there at 120 to 180, blah, blah, blah. But roughly around your body weight in grams per pound of, so grams per pound of body weight is roughly around your body weight for protein. Now, you would take that number and multiply it by 4, because there's 4 calories per gram in protein on average. So if I'm eating 150 grams of protein, that's 600 calories. So if I took my total daily calories, I subtract away my protein calories, the remaining calories should now be divided among fats and carbs. Now, what we want to do next is split our total calorie account into 3 sections. So if my recommended calories for daily maintenance is 2,400, then I would divide that by 3, that's 800. I would then think of dividing my day by 3. So the waking part of our day is usually 16 to 18 hours because we sleep for 6 to 8 hours. I would divide that by 3. So roughly 5 to 6 hours. The first 5 to 6 hours of the day, I should consume a third of my calories. And that would include protein, carbs, and fats. And I'll get to that in a second. But a third of my calories for the first 5 to 6 hours of the day. The second 5 to 6 hours of the day should be another third of my calories and protein. And then the final 5 to 6 hours of the day should be my final 1/3 of calories and protein. If we subtract away the protein-related calories, the remaining calories per third at the time of your workout. So if you work out in the morning 1/3 of your day, the remaining calories that aren't protein calories should be carbohydrates. If you work out in the middle of the day, it should be carbohydrates. If you work out at the end of the day, it should be carbohydrates. The other time blocks, you can play around with whatever percentage of carbohydrates and fats you want, doesn't matter. In general, it would be good to have a mixed distribution. It can be 30-70, 70-30, 50-50, 60-40, whatever the hell you want. But a little bit of fats, a little bit of carbs at the other times of the day, totally fine. But at the time of our workout, we want to push more into proteins and carbs and keep our fats minimal. Fats are very slow digesting. So if I'm eating fuel to fuel my workout, I want the fuel to be available. If I consume fats, it's going to not be very readily available because it's slow digesting. Our body can't really get to it yet. It takes freaking forever to get in the bloodstream. So around the time of our workout, we want to focus on carbohydrates and proteins. That structure is a great starting place. Is using the thirds distribution for calories and protein. And then the time block related to our training should be mostly proteins and carbs. The other time blocks can be whatever percentage of carbs and fats we want, doesn't matter. Eventually, when you get really good at that, there is more optimal distribution, such as quarter, third, like a half, quarter, which is at the time blocks away from your workouts, you only have a quarter, 25% of your carbs and protein. The time block around your training, you actually have half. So you're even eating more food around the time of your workout. That would be more optimal. If you think of a bell curve of your activity level of the day, the peak of your activity level is around your workout. That would actually be when we want the peak of our food intake to be. Whereas people typically don't do that. So the thirds is just to make sure we have a nice even spread. Eventually, as you get good at that, you would then go to the half, quarter, which is creating that bell curve, which better matches actually our body's utilization of the fuel. And then you can even get down into, okay, I want to peak the curve of carbs ahead of the workout, but peak the curve of protein post-workout. So there's a lot of nuances you can get to. So starting with the thirds is a great place to start. The third component, we said again, there's 3 things to focus on: hydration, fuel, and electrolytes. The third, electrolytes, super freaking easy. Let's make this one easy, okay? Is follow the carbohydrate and calorie intake process we just talked about. And then just add an electrolyte powder to your pre-workout drink or intra-workout drink. Sometimes people don't like to drink fluid while they work out. Fine, I don't care. Drink it ahead of it, okay? Drink right before the workout. And you can do an electrolyte powder, super freaking cheap. It's like $30 for like 100 plus servings. Very cheap, like 30 cents, probably even less than that, like a quarter a workout. You can get that on Amazon. You can get it through NutriCost. NutriCost is where I get my supplements. You can use the code BrutalIron10 for a 10% discount. And then actually whatever you spend at NutriCost using that code, we get a 10% kickback on commission. So it's a great way to support the podcast if you'd like to do that. And I appreciate it if you do very, very much. It's a great way for us to pay for all these hosting fees and whatnot. So thank you to those who do buy supplements on NutriCost and use the code BrutalIron10. It does help the podcast. But that would be a quick, easy, simple way. No need to worry. Get your calories in using that third distribution like we talked about. Stay hydrated using the volume amount that we said was the baseline minimum of half your body weight in ounces of fluid, but actually getting up to your body weight in ounces of fluid. If you take care of those 2 things, electrolytes are less and less and less important, and you can actually just check it off the list by just drinking an electrolyte powder in pre-workout or intra-workout. Super easy. Make it super easy. Don't make it complicated. From there, what you can do is you can actually just track your performance and how you feel in your workouts using a scale from 1 to 5 is a scale I use with clients. 1 is it's the worst freaking day you've ever had. 2 is it's pretty crappy. 3 is pretty average. 4 is, it was a pretty good day. 5 was, that was a pretty kick-ass day. Really enjoyed that day. So 5 stars. Think of it as a star rating. 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars, 2 stars, 1 star. You want to try to have as many 4 and 5 star days as possible. If you feel a little underfed, try to play around with your calorie distribution and put more around your workouts. All of a sudden you can go from a 3 star to a 4 star or a 5 star. If you feel a little bit like super thirsty after workout, maybe we didn't hydrate enough, so try to drink more pre-workout or intra-workout and see if that helps you with your rating scale. You just want to play with these elements a little bit over the course of many weeks. And then you can start to fine-tune the right amount of hydration, the right amount of fueling that matches your needs and your preferences. And there you go. So that is the process of pre-workout carb loading. We gave you the specific example from that client and then some good things that you can think of on how to optimize that for yourself. If you'd like some coaching with this, if you want me to help simplify this and answer that, that's exactly what I do. One-on-one coaching is definitely the best service for this type of protocol. You can learn more about that service on our website at www.brutalirongym.com. Right now, it's just $200 a month, no contracts. It's freaking easy peasy, well worth your money. I know I'm the one doing it, so of course I'm going to say that. But if you've listened to this podcast at all, you know I don't bullshit you. It's a damn good service, and I wish I would have had this available when I was younger. But $200 a month, I will write your training program for you, nutrition program, and check in with you every single week. Pretty good service. Again, you can learn more about that on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. You can also email me any questions you have at any time at brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The more people we share it with, the more people can help. If you like the podcast, you can donate to support the podcast on the website, or, as I mentioned, buy your supplements through NutriCost.com using the code BrutalIron10. You get a 10% discount. We get a 10% commission. Win-win. And then if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.